So you have a third-party API key, maybe something like GIPHY. If you want to make API calls to a server that's not yours, and that server's endpoints are protected in any way, usually an API key, you got to take special precautions. So let's dive into that. There are three parties involved. There's the client, your web browser. There's the server, your Node web server or whatever you're using. And there's a third party. The tempting thing might be, I want the resources. And I have the resources. So let's just have these two talk. Unfortunately, we can't do that. Well, we can, but it's a bad idea. Why? Because whenever we make a request to the third party, we have to include the API key along with the request. So they know it's us who's asking. Maybe they're charging us, maybe they're just tracking how much we use it, but they want to associate the calls we're making with our account, our API key. In order to have the client talk to the third-party API directly, you would need to give the client the key. But we want to keep this secret. It is vital to keep a third-party API key secret. We have to jump through a whole lot of hoops to do that. And so if at the end of the day, we just give it to the client, well then, everyone who uses our app can just go console log it from the browser. So we can't give our client the API key. What do we do instead? Well, we can't change who has the secret and who wants the secret, but we can take advantage of our server and have it play the role of middleman or person in the middle. What that looks like is, I want the resource. Hey server, can you ask the API, the third-party API, for the resource? The server will say, sure thing, hold on a second. In other words, we're going to hit some sort of route, maybe get /gif/random or something. And in response, before the server, our web server, sends back a response to the client, it's going to go fetch the data by making its own get call to whatever the endpoint is on GIPHY. And it's also going to include the API key. In this scenario, only our server and the third party know about the API key. So as long as we keep it secure on our server, everything's fine. Then the third party will respond with the stuff. Our server will res.send the stuff back to the client. And the client gets what it wants, and the key is never exposed. It only stays between the third party and the server. So how do we accomplish this, and how do we store the key securely? Well, that's where we got to look at the code. You should probably just follow industry best practice. And this is relatively language agnostic. We do this in Node, but a really similar process is followed in any backend, any web server, any language with third-party API keys. We create a file, we make it a dot file so it's hidden, and we call it .env. And it's important to stick with that name. In here is where we put our secrets, something like GIPHY API key. And then an equal sign, and then the value. I'm just going to make something up. You don't need quotes. You don't need spaces. In fact, you shouldn't have spaces. You're creating a variable name. Generally, you want to use screaming snake case, all caps and underscores, an equal sign, and then whatever the value is on the right-hand side. And this is going to just be stored in a text file, .env, and it'll be imported into our JavaScript on the server as text. So the only data type we're able to use is text. This file is showing up gray because it's in my git ignore. Remember, the whole point of everything we're doing is to keep this secret key secure. In fact, I'm going to rename this secret key. All right. So I have this in a file, and it's a file that's not going to be backed up. So one, don't lose this file. You might want to put it in your password manager if you can't recover it. Now, the nice thing is if you go into GIPHY's dashboard and you're logged in, you can see your secret key again. So it's hard to lose this one. But how does our code get access to it? On my computer, our code can just look at the file. But when my code is running on a server somewhere, this file is not going to be there. Well, what we're going to do is we're going to actually store the key not in the server initially. The server is going to run on a computer, probably Heroku's computer or maybe AWS, Microsoft Azure, or whatever. Right now, it's our computer. And computers that run pretty much all operating systems have this concept of environmental variables and vars. It's just information stored in variables in the environment of the computer. And you can actually open up Terminal and play around with this and see if you have any environmental variables saved on your computer that are just available for any running program to access. So what we're going to do is we are going to take anything in this .env file and turn it into an environmental variable on the machine running our server. And then our server will just look at the machine it's running on and access the environmental variable. Thankfully, we don't have to code this up ourselves. We get to rely on a third-party package from NPM. And that is the .env package, which it does not look like we have in this project. So you probably need to install it. It is really important when you're doing NPM installs to spell things right, because there could be a similarly named package that's malicious, and that would be bad. So I like to, as a rule of thumb, actually go ahead and go out to NPM and just verify that I'm downloading what I think I am. Now this one I've used enough. I know it's just .env, one word, no spaces, but it's the one that gets downloaded 40 million times a week. And I'm just going to grab that and copy and paste because, again, I don't want to risk messing this up. This is essentially something that's designed to access the secrets on my computer, and I want to treat that with the respect and, frankly, the fear it deserves. So I'm going to npm install.env. Great, I have some third-party code. It's installed. Now I need to know how to use it. And thankfully, that npm.js page usually does a pretty good job of filling you in on the ways to go about it. And here, they say to, as early as possible in your application, import and configure .env. Now, thankfully, we don't need to do a lot of configuration. We can just grab this require.env configure, and if you want, you could console log it and see all of the environmental variables on your computer. So I'm going to grab this bit of code, and I am going to head back. I think I accidentally clicked a link on that NVM or on that NPM page and went to a YouTube video. I wish more NPM packages linked to YouTube videos. So when they say early on in the code, they mean the server code, the code that needs the key. So super early on here, I'm going to import this. And what that's going to do is it's going to scan my computer for environmental variables in this file. Let me rephrase that. It's going to look at this file. It's going to grab anything from here, and then it's going to actually add them to the environmental variables on my computer. Now, Node has access to my computer. That's one of the big differences between Node and JavaScript in the browser. Both Node and the browser run JavaScript, but they're very different environments. They have access to different things. In the browser, JavaScript has access to the DOM and all the wonderful DOM methods we use. Think document.anything. Think about all the great web APIs. In Node, well, Node's just running on a computer, so it has access to the computer and everything the operating system gives it access to, like the running processes. And so we can access process.env, the running process in our computer that has all the environmental information, all the environmental variables. We can't do that in the browser. So .env does not work in the browser or the front end, which is okay because, as we saw earlier, we don't need it to. In fact, we don't want it to. All right. So now that I have it, the question becomes, how do I use it? Well, let me go ahead and do a quick const. And here I'm going to basically create a variable and assign it the value I get when I read the environmental variable. So I'm going to give it the name, and it's pretty conventional to do this. I'm going to give it the name that I assigned it here. So const GIPHY API key equals process.env dot. And now what I put here is actually the label from the file. So this goes and grabs the secret from the environment and assigns it to a variable, and I'm just choosing to reuse the same name. And then I'm going to restart my server so we can see it. And I'm also going to give us a little bit of a console log of that variable. I'm going to say, by the way, the secret key for GIPHY is, and then I'm going to throw in my variable there. And here we see I have NodeMom running, so this restarted automatically. Let's say import 5001. By the way, the secret key for GIPHY is secret key. So it could appear like, oh, I'm just grabbing that from this file, like I would code from one module to another, but it's a little more complicated. I have stored a secret in a hidden file. I've added this file to my gitignore, so it does not get backed up to GitHub because this is a secret. I want to keep it secret. I then have a third-party dependency at npm installed, a package called .env, and when I run it, it looks for a file called .env, and it adds any key value pairs from here to my environmental variables running on my operating system. Sorry, existing on my operating system. Variables don't run. Then I can write code, process.env.port, process.env.giphy, process.env. all kinds of things to grab my environmental variables. So process.env is the environmental variable object, and then I can pull specific variables out of it. So it's essentially a more complicated way of dealing with it, with the idea that the key, the secret thing, the thing I definitely want to keep secure, only ever lives in the server, and the server keeps it secure. It never gets sent to the client. It never gets sent to GitHub. And in the case when the conversation between the third party and the server happens, well, the third party already knows the key. They're who I got it from. They're keeping it secure. Otherwise, there's much bigger problems. And since we're using encrypted traffic on the web nowadays, it's secure in transit. And the key never leaves a secure space. Now that I have it on the server, all that remains is for me to take any code that talks to the third-party API and move it into my server routes. My app.get, my app.post if you're creating a GIF, my app. Whatever you're doing. Anything that needs to get information from GIPHY is going to have to go through the server. Good luck.